It's unique because when you're first starting out in a business, there's nothing valuable. Not to say your idea is not valuable, right? It could change the world, right?
Sure.
But at the very beginning, it's not valuable, so it feels easy to give up a percentage of it. But say that business starts making $100,000. Say it starts making $250,000, or you sneak up into $1 million, or it's really working and you get to $5, $10, $15 million. You got to think at that point, is the 50% that I'm giving up to my partner or the 67% I'm giving up to those other partners, am I going to be okay with that?
Welcome to the Manage Chaos podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson, and today Katrina gets the day off, and I get the pleasure of talking to a lawyer, an owner, an expert, Chase Neely. Business partnerships can scale your business, open new doors, and multiply your impact, but only if they're built right. And when that business partnership that you're really hoping scales and opens and multiplies is actually co-ownership, the lack of clarity can get, really messy. So today we're diving into the fine print of business partnerships with a legal expert so you can avoid the landmines and build relationships that actually help you grow. By trade and training, Chase is an intellectual property attorney who helps Grammy Award-winning songwriters, producers, New York Times bestselling authors, and other creative professionals at the intersection between their business and their art. In addition to this, his legal work, Chase is also the co-founder and president of Leverage Brands, a company built to market messages. I'm so happy to have Chase on the podcast today, talking all about business partnerships. And Chase, thank you so much for agreeing to be here and talk with me. I'm very looking forward to this.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It is a privilege to dive into this topic that has a lot of misinformation out there, but also has some really solid things that you can do to make sure you're protected.
I can only imagine. I mean, I feel like I only know a drop in the bucket here. And that's honestly where we kind of connected. I think it was a couple weeks ago. We had met at a conference and then we connected afterwards. And we were really talking about how many conversations Katrina and I had that other business owners were asking us questions about partnerships. And we can definitely give them some best practices as far as like know your lanes and all the things. But when it comes to the legal aspects, I mean, I was really surprised that most of the conversation honestly was about like my business owner this, my business owner that. So this is great. I mean, it felt like it was fate that we connected right afterwards for this episode.
Yeah, definitely. And it's become something that is really prevalent right now, especially. And so I would imagine that some of your listeners today are wondering what to do about a business partnership, whether to enter a business partnership, how to exit a business partnership, or really just how to manage being in a business partnership. Because when times get tough, when money gets tight, that's when partnerships show their true colors.
Ooh, I feel like that's great foreshadowing. I'm going to use that as like the front clip. Okay, so in that instance then, as you kind of, put the wrapper around it, so to speak, what do you wish business owners knew before they ever walked through your doors? Because one of the things you said to me was that you talk to a lot of people once they're ready to like get out. So before they get to that point, when they're just thinking about it, what do you recommend?
I think the number one thing to remember is that you don't have to have a business partnership. I think there is a whole proliferation of advice, whether it's from the Silicon Valley startup world of, hey, to make it, you got to have 3 co-founders. You got to have the operations, the sales, and the CTO. And if you don't have that, your startup's doomed. I've just found that to not be the case. If you have an idea and you're good at implementing on an idea, just remember that you do not have to have a business partnership to make that idea work. And because of that, you got to be really careful about who you choose as a business partner. And there's valid reasons to choose a business partner, right? I'm not going to besmirch that. But really, you have to think it through really, really hard to make sure that you're making the best decision for the idea. At that point, you become the steward of the idea. Is this best for the idea? When somebody loses interest or somebody isn't as excited about it or can't commit the time and resources to it that you can, are you going to be okay with that? Is the idea going to survive despite that? And that's really, you have to have unique clarity at the very beginning of what that partnership really looks like and what they're bringing to it.
What do you think people should search for in order to get that clarity? Because I think your point about, you can have business leaders be part of the business with you without them actually being a formalized partnership. They could just be employees or people that, work with you. So how do you help people, or how do you recommend, I guess, people get that clarity?
I think it's unique because when you're first starting out in a business, there's nothing valuable. Not to say your idea is not valuable, right? It could change the world, right?
Sure.
But at the very beginning, it's not valuable, so it feels easy to give up a percentage of it. But say that business starts making $100,000. Say it starts making $250,000, or you sneak up into $1 million, or it's really working and you get to $5, $10, $15 million. You got to think at that point, is the 50% that I'm giving up to my partner, or the 67% I'm giving up to those other partners, am I going to be okay with that if the business does well? And to be okay with that, they have to bring something that you don't bring to the business. They have to bring something that's complementary to what you do. And I have done it both ways, by the way. So I've been in a business where I have a business partner. We've been doing that for 8 years. We have had conflict, and that's okay, but we've also worked through conflict and really defined who we're going to be in that business. But I've also been on the side where I didn't have a business partner. And I think there's truth to the saying, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go with others. But what that doesn't say is, if you want to go far, go with partners. It says go with others. So you have to build that team. I think the seminal work right now is Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan's Who Not How. You got to build that team around you to do the things that you can't do. And then partnership can be a reward. Or I think early on, sometimes when the idea is cumulative, that partnership can come at that point as well. But just make sure that the people who are contributing to it have something different than what you have.
That's a great book recommendation, and we'll make sure to link that below. They talk a lot about the zone of genius, which I also think is such a great way to understand where your strengths are, even in partnerships, outside of partnerships. So we'll definitely put that in the notes. I'll remember that. So as far as conflict, you mentioned like you've worked through a lot of that. You have seen a lot of it with the legal side of things, and then also just being a business owner, being a human, let's be honest, just being a human, we deal with a lot of conflict. So because people are people, conflict is really inevitable. How should business partners navigate disagreements? And can you talk even a little bit, it doesn't have to just be from the legal perspective, but can you also talk a little bit about what is helpful for business owners or partnerships to kind of consider in good times for those times that really they can't avoid?
That's a great question. You prepare for the rain when it's not raining, right?
Yeah,
That's when you buy
exactly.
the umbrella. Same thing with lending too, right? You get the money when you don't need it.
That's right.
But I think that for business partnerships specifically, if the lawyer gets involved, it's over, right? Because at that point, you're so entrenched on either side of the position that it's really hard to come back to the middle and meet each other at a place where everybody's going to be happy moving forward. A lot of times when I get called in is before an attorney should be called in the sense that I get called in as an advisor to the owner of the business before they even consider approaching their partner about what they're unhappy about. What are my options under the operating agreement? What are my options under our bylaws? How could I approach this? And so one of my first pieces of advice is, what do you want? Do you want the business to continue? Do you want to own 100% of the business? Do you want to continue working with this person? Do you want out? Any of those is a fine answer for me, but you got to know exactly what you want when you're approaching that conflict. And I think business owners in particular, there tends to be a balance of power in the partnership. There's somebody who's going to be more vocal, somebody who's going to be more demanding, somebody who's going to just be louder, frankly. And then there's the other person who might be a little quieter, a little more reserved. And a lot of times I get approached by that person because they're saying, I don't know what to do. This person is domineering, they're commanding, they're controlling me. There's psychological manipulation. I'm like, well, I'm not that kind of counselor, but we'll keep talking through it. But what you get to in those situations is you start to understand that you have to empower the business owner to say, you own 50% of this business, or you own 30%, whatever it is, whatever percentage you own that, and you have rights because of that. So number one, you have to step into your role as a business owner. And number two, you have to make the decision that's best for the business. Is this partnership still best for the business? If that's true, let's find a way to reconcile. Let's find a way to mediate this to where we're not getting lawyers involved, but y'all are getting together in a room and talking through your issues and embracing that conflict. In Dare to Lead, Brene Brown talks about that awkward 10 seconds of conversation in a confrontation, right? And so like with my business partner at Leverage Brands, I say, we're going to lean into that 10 seconds of awkwardness so that we can continue the partnership. It's worth it to me to be awkward for 10 seconds so that we can continue in the partnership because that's what's best. He adds compliments to the business that I can't. I'll never be able to. And so you have to lean into that 10 seconds if the business is to be saved. If it's not, I just recommend that very clearly in your contracts, you say what happens in the event of a dispute. And a lot of times what you're going to have is what we call a waterfall dispute resolution. So it goes from mediation to binding arbitration to court. And that's in order of price, by the way. So mediation is the cheapest, and then arbitration is a little more expensive, sometimes equal to the expense of court. But that's what I would recommend is if it's going to split, make sure that you have that contract in place where you can split cheaply versus splitting expensively. So have that waterfall dispute resolution. And then if you're not going to split, lean into the awkwardness of that confrontation as a business owner who has a say in how the business is run.
Yeah, that 10 seconds can definitely feel like 10 minutes, but it's 10 seconds well spent, I would say. Because you never know. Sometimes that conflict is actually not as big of a deal as what it feels like once you're having a conversation.
That's right. I think people get so entrenched, Rachel, in one side or the other that it just feels difficult to see that other side. And so in that 10 seconds, you're going to get one of two answers. You're either going to get a, I didn't know you felt that way, or you're going to get a, you're right, you are wrong, and let's go after it, right? So you're going to figure it out in that 10 seconds. And if you figure it out in that 10 seconds, it's a lot cheaper than calling me and having me spend 10 hours on the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so when you're thinking then, people are thinking about getting it together. They're thinking about how to put structures in place so that they can end well as have, whatever structure or balance or pairings that make their partnership what it is. From, just like 3 tips and tricks of like tactics, I guess, like just practical, these are the conversations you need to have if you're going to say yes or before you say yes. Do you have any recommendations for, listen, if you're going to do it, this is the conversations you need to have?
Yeah, you have to decide percentage ownership. So if it's going to be 50-50, it's really hard to resolve a dispute easily, right? Because it instigates deadlock immediately in the operating agreement or bylaws. You each own 50%. It's going to be really hard to make it to where one side wins every time. So one thing you could do is make unanimous decisions on the big things. So we're going to sell the company, we're going to go into debt, whatever it is. And then on the little decisions that can cause a lot of conflict, right? Because it's the death by 1,000 paper cuts. You split into roles and responsibilities where one person has complete autonomy over their area of expertise and you have complete autonomy over yours. So if you're going to go 50-50 or you're going to be an even partnership in any way, that's one way to make sure that you can kind of alleviate that deadlock. But the other thing to consider is, should we be 50-50? And I would say in most cases, generalizations are hard, Rachel.
I know.
But in most cases, a 50-50 partnership is set up to fail from the beginning. And I say that having a 50-50 partnership, but I also worked with that guy for 7 years before we started our business. So we kind of knew how to lean into the strengths of each other. So I would say, just in general, have those unique roles and responsibilities. Really consider is 50-50 the right kind of partnership for me. And if it's not, that's another awkward conversation, right? You don't deserve to make the final decision on this business. It was my idea. So let's be 51-4. But you know what that shows you immediately? Is this the right partner to be in business with? Because if they say, no, I'm not going to do that, well, that's easy. Cool. There might be somebody else out there who's the right partner for this or the right contractor to help me take this further than I can take it myself.
This is really interesting. I'm like thinking about all my past experiences, both in knowing people that have been in these kind of partnerships and even things that I've done in the past. And I'm like, oh man, maybe that was the thing. Maybe we set it up right from the beginning to be hard. It's really that I never considered 50-50 as being like anything but totally equal and even, but that doesn't mean good and helpful, which is interesting. It's sort of a, who are they and how well do you know them and what are the details? Like you said, generalities are hard.
Yeah, and I think, for me, there are ways to get around fairness to where it's still fair, even if it's not 50-50. So you have to be creative, right? And so the best situation, by the way, as an attorney, let me speak to you about hiring more attorneys, right? But the best situation is each partner is represented and the business is represented. Because in that scenario, somebody's protecting the idea in the business, while other people are fighting over the individual interests as they come into a partnership. But if you can set it up that way, everybody knows the rules. Everybody knows the expectations. I think it's Brene Brown again who said uncommunicated expectations, that's hope. It's really tough to run a business on hope, especially when things get hard, especially when there's conflict, especially when somebody wants to do something differently than you want to as a partner, right? So if you can really be clear about those expectations in the beginning, it saves all sorts of time and trouble.
And what about any partnerships out there where they're already in some sort of messiness? And messiness being maybe it's not clear, maybe it is 50-50 and they're running into that gridlock, whatever that looks like. What do you do at that? What do you recommend people do at that point? And maybe there is or isn't conflict, but they're going to have those awkward 10-second conversations. They're trying to get a better business hygiene maybe put into place? Just what does that look like, or what's the recommendation once you're kind of already in it?
I think at the very beginning, or close to the beginning, we talked about what do you want out of the business? This is a marketing question, so I'm going to borrow from my marketing company. If you could wave a magic wand for a solution, what would that look like? Based on that answer, that's how you build the strategy to attack the issues in the partnership. And so if the magic wand waving is, I want this partner out, my answer is, okay, we can probably do that. How much are you willing to spend, right? There is a how to each answer to that question, but there's some realistic practicalities that you have to at least address if you're going to pursue that how. And so a lot of times what ends up happening is you get locked in a conflict and the business is honestly not worth that much to where a litigation is advisable. But what ends up happening is everybody gets entrenched, and then it's a principal thing. And when it's a principal thing and people have money in their pockets to defend, that's when the lawyers make their money. So that's fine. I mean, if you want to do that, cool. But I'm always going to try to give the best advice for your stated outcome. And if we can't work to that, maybe we do get to a litigation at some point. But hopefully we can have reasonable minds prevail to where there's an outcome that everybody's happy with. What I will say though, Rachel, is you don't have to be in a partnership you're unhappy with in business. I think that there are ways to improve the situation regardless of how you choose to do that. If you're done, you're done. Let's get you out. If you want to try to improve the situation, let's put steps in place, key performance indicators, whatever it is, where everybody's being held accountable. Because at the end of the day, a partnership failing usually coincides with a business failing or with a business not meeting the expectations and that's an accountability problem. That's not a legal problem.
That's really good. That is really interesting, especially the reasons why businesses fail. I mean, so many partnerships are dissolved based on human things. And like you just talked about, expectations or values or vision, or not doing the work, like personal work, not like, labor. Okay, so we have one final question here. When it's needed, what do you do to exit the partnership with as little negative collateral damage as possible?
This will not surprise anybody, but it starts with transparency. Just being really honest about what's not working. I had an artist who was in a major label deal, and it was time for him to exit that deal. And so we were able to exit everybody as friends, but that's because we were super honest with what wasn't working. The last thing that your business partner wants, and it might not feel this way, by the way, but the last thing your business partner wants is an unhappy business partner. That does them no good. It does the business no good. You unproductive and unhappy, it hurts the business. It's holding the business back. And so you just have to be really open and honest with those things so that you can continually and constantly push toward a solution that gets you to that magic wand outcome that we spoke about before. And so I think that if you can be super honest in the exit, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be nice and pretty and, hey, let's shake hands and be friends. No, it doesn't guarantee that. But it does guarantee, like, as you get further from the actual conflict and the actual release from the partnership, I think everybody can be happy with the outcome, even if the method of the outcome wasn't so pretty. I'm a big fan, Rachel, and this is going to sound weird coming from an attorney. I don't want to burn bridges, right? There's been very few bridges that I've burned in my past, hopefully. Now, people might comment in and say, you burned a bridge with me, and I'm sorry. If that's you, I apologize.
You're like, don't keep it against me. It's fine.
That's right. I try not to. And I think that if we can just be human in those moments and say, look, neither of us is thrilled about this. This is not going the way that either of us anticipated it would go. How do you want to wind this down? I think that is a different posture than let me out or I'm suing you. And if we can start there, you have a better chance at exiting well.
Well, this has been such an amazing episode. Thank you so much, Chase. Your thoughts and your insights, I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I was hoping for. This is perfect. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, shoot me a DM on LinkedIn. It's just Chase Neely is the /, and Rachel, I'm sure you can put that in the notes. I'd love to hear from you. It's always hard to be in a situation where you feel like there's no hope, there's no exit, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I have been through enough of these to know at this point, there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's not always going to be like this. There's great wisdom in the Bible. It says, this too shall pass. So hold on to that. And if you need to talk to somebody, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you again. If you enjoyed this episode, you can write us a review. It really helps us to know exactly what you want to hear. If you want to hear another episode like the one that Chase had, you can let us know that too. Also, you can follow us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. But as always, thank you for joining us. And I'll talk to you again on the next episode of the Managed Chaos Podcast.